Hello out there, Mob Crush World and Facebook and Twitch and all the other cool places I'm able to restream because Mob Crush technology we're running on here. So, oh, my glasses are on. Safety glasses. I didn't tell you earlier, use them. Your eyes are important, believe me. I spent a whole bunch of money to get mine LASIK. I ain't gonna mess them up. So let's see here. So since the last time I aired, I went ahead and did a whole bunch of cuts. They're all done. Still some sawdust on the table. And as with every word rigging project, there's an issue, and I'll show you to in a minute, but let's see what we got here. Excuse the airplane, but okay, so as you see here, like I showed you before with our markers, we marked with the chalk, center the hole right on it. Ooh, hello. Right to the other side. See? Woo. Okay, so we got our 9 holes. One's covered by this piece of wood over here, and I'll explain why this wood is here in a second. But all our holes, you notice all of it's marked and happy. We also did our recesses for the hinges, like I told you about. So all I did was I got my hinges, I put them on here, I traced an outline right there, just like I did this. Then I went in with this router. Thing the router, so you have to set the depth. So I set the depth just enough to make this notch to cut out this little piece, and let's get this angle so you can see it. Here we go, see? So now when this goes in that hole, it's nice and flush. See, it's nice and even, just like that, nice and smooth, beautiful. I can put some wood filler in the sides if I want to make it nice and perfect. Do the same to this. Now sometimes router bits, just like any tool, gets dull, so I need to get mine sharpened up. And when they get dull, you start getting these little fringes like this. So you can, obviously first things first, you need to sharpen your bit later, but you can just take a little knife like that, or chisel. This is one of my just kind of sharpened chisel I use for kind of just these little things like this. And just go through, shazam, clean it up. So I'm going to do that with all of this over here. This isn't a chisel, actually this is just, if I remember, it's a paint scraper, some kind of scraper. But I use it for that sharpened edge. It works just like you can use a knife for this too. I just prefer this tool because it's just easier for me to work with. Sometimes the right tool for the job is not necessarily a tool that's made for it. See? Swiped them all off. See? Nice clean cut now. Isn't that awesome? Okay, so now to the problem we had. There's always one. So these hinges, I put them on here just like that. I marked the holes with my pencil. By the way, notice the pencil's not rolling. That's why you need one of those pencils. I marked the holes, and then I was going to pre-drill. I was going to pre-drill the holes for my screw. Why do we pre-drill holes? The reason you pre-drill holes is so you don't split your wood. You're adding material into wood. When you put a hammer, a nail, anything, the wood's going to want, the reason wood splits is because you're pushing between the grains and they split apart. Well, since these grains run all the way across, you can imagine, easy way to think about it is have a book on your desk. And you get a little pencil, who cares if you damage your book, but like a pencil or something sharp, and you push into the pages, you notice it goes around. It doesn't make a perfect circle, it makes like this kind of teardrop thing around the pages. That's, wood grain works exact same way. So if you remove some of the material by drilling a pre-drill hole, it won't split, and we have less chance of it splitting. If your hole's not big enough, it'll still split. Secondly, the reason it'll work is because these threads, if you look, see if I can get that on there. If you look between the threads, if your drill hole is that, around that size, what you're trying to go for, the threads are what holds this in place. That's the secret to screws. The actual threads are what hold the bolt in place. It's not the long shaft, it's the thread and the friction that holds on that. So that gives a little bite to the wood. Which actually brings up amusing that I want to explain to you guys. When do you use a nail and when do you use a screw? I probably have been asked this a few times, like when do I use nails and when do I use screws, and is it okay to interchange them? There are some times you're going to want to use screws over nails. There are certain situations where it's better to use screws over nails. Flooring, definitely want to use a screw. The problem if you use a nail on flooring, have you ever walked on flooring and heard that creaking in your house? They use nails. Nails will basically, the wood will start rubbing against the nail and it loosens it and it has just enough room to wiggle, and that creaking is the wood rubbing against the metal nail, making that creaking sound. If you had a screw, it has teeth. There's nothing to rub. And if it actually starts rubbing against the screw, well, then it pretty much doesn't have any catch anyways. But in any event, that's why you use screws over nails typically, is when you want to hold things tightly in place versus just kind of fastening them. If I'm ever trying to do bearing weight, I tend to use screws too, just to extra grip. But back to the issue I said at hand. I know I'm going a little off track here. Make my quality, the quality of this work. I told you I'm an amateur. I'm a professional sawdust maker. I don't actually make furniture. I actually make sawdust. See, look, I'll show you. Nice fine sawdust here. See, this is grade A sawdust. This is what I'm good at making. The byproduct of me making sawdust, table thing. Okay, so as I promised, here's the issue. Now let me turn it back around. Sorry I'm giving you seasickness. Look at that. Notice the screw is longer than our wood. Yeah. So this is a pack of screws that was supplied to me with these hinges for this wood. Unfortunately, it's a very common mistake to do this. It's not uncommon. That's why I'm not truly surprised about it. Because you don't really see the screws when you buy the hinges. You're like, oh, that hinge looks awesome, I'll get that. You don't look at what screws they are. So this is a kind of a tale of caution. Check the screw on this. So there's a couple ways to solve this. And this is why I had an awesome piece of plywood here. My thought was that if I use a scrap piece of plywood, cut it down to a shape, and double the thickness of the wood, then I would be able, the screws would basically fit in the wood, that would be big enough to hold the screws. So that's one thought. Let me put this on this counter because I'm going to be sitting here and using for a bit. So that's one thought right there. Now, the issue with that is that with what I'm building, that'll work for half the hinges. Because that wood will be hidden behind the screen thing I'm making. Oh, this is a really bad angle. Yeah, that's much better. The wood will be hiding behind it so you won't see it. So basically this is the part everybody's viewing, and so it's painted. My extra bolt's back here. The hinge you can see, but the screw will be poking out this way. And it'll be kind of hidden. That'll work for half the hinges. The other problem is the way two of the hinges are working is that the screw will be poking out towards people. Actually, half the hinges will be that way. So the extra block would be visible because it's on the other side of the wood, and it will look pretty like trash. So that won't work. Then just like every woodworker has, I have a box filled with old project screws and stuff I had. So these 5/8 inch screws work perfectly. The problem is they're number 6s. Screws have a size and they're a number. The number is this, basically the width of them. The problem with these number 6s is their heads are too small for this hinge. Now, the way that this is being used, this hinge is really not going to be a huge load-bearing part of this. The hinge actually is just to hold a couple of these panels together and so they stand upright. So, in all honesty, nobody's going to be leaning on it. Because if they lean on it, the whole thing's going to fall over anyways. There's not a lot of weight being put on it. So, a shorter screw won't hurt. You typically use longer screws to be able to get a better grip on things. But that's not the case. So what I'm left with is two options. I can either go to Home Depot or a local store, whatever you have. But around here we have Home Depot and Lowe's, and I'll tell you the difference of those stores in a minute. And find screws with the same size head that are 5/8 inch long. Possible. I'll have to buy 4 times, let's see, I have 8 of these, so 32 of these screws. Not too expensive. Another option is I'm going to be cutting off I could cut off just the tip of these, which will make the screw hard to bore in, so I don't have to worry about that. It's going to be a problem if I did that, but it would basically act more like a machine screw than a wood screw. Which might just get us by. This doesn't have to last forever. This is not like a permanent fixture. At least I don't think so. It's going up. And if it does, I can repair it so it will be, I'll change them out to bolts or something. That's another option. I'm more inclined to go to the store and pick up some new screws. And remember I told you it sucks, you know, the project going to the store? It happens. This is what happens when we don't check every single detail. And you're not going to check every detail. So get used to it. It happens. It happens to me all the time. It happens to a lot of woodworkers. The benefit of them, though, is that after you have these projects, you start accumulating all this extra little tidbit stuff that you can just go, oh, I have that piece and I can just pull it out. Now, I told you that this might act like a machine screw if I cut off the tip. What I meant by that was wood screws, if you see right here, are pointy. See, pointy. That point allows this screw to be driven into wood. It basically will push the wood aside and let it go in. Of course, now that we probably made a pilot hole, and this should screw a lot easier, so that point's not really that necessary, but it does its job. A machine screw has no point. It's flat on the front because it's meant to be used like on metal and such. You're basically bolting two things together. So the ability for it to thread itself to make its own pilot hole then is not as important because you're just going to hold two things together. Also, machine screws, though, have a lot more threads. So here you'll see these threads are kind of big, and there's a few of them. Machine screws have a lot more. Yeah, these are called. There's actually another version of this that has wider threads, or long. They're actually more to the side. On the spiral, those are called coarse thread screws. They're made to grab specific material like drywall. Tons of things about screws. See, like I said, there's a whole bunch of woodworking that people don't know. Nails, screws, types, galvanizers, lead, zinc, and all this other stuff. It's really actually awesome to think about that. How much technology, if you actually, seriously, this is technology. How much technology has gone into designing and building these? These screws, if you actually think about it, they have a thread count. There's actually how many threads per inch on the screw, or a millimeter. There's different versions of counting it. That's a thread count. There's different measurements and gauges. There's actually quality control to make sure that that is true for a lot of these. Different screws for different objects. Anchors to hold things into walls. If you imagine all of this stuff is used to build that we have today, like these different types of screws, machine screws, wood screws, all these power tools, and plus the hand tools and all these specialized tools that we use. Think about back in the day when they only had hand tools, no power tools. They made furniture. They made houses. Like seriously, think about making a house without having a framing nail gun. Pounding it in by hand. Better yet, think of someone making the nails. Like these are casts. These are cheap, easy to make. We have machines that do all this stuff. There wasn't so-called machines back then to make these nails. In the very, very early days, nails were made by blacksmiths. Someone pounded metal to make the nails. Like the nails for horseshoes were made by the blacksmiths. Kind of interesting things to think about on that. But anyways, this is the current project issue I had. But the reason I actually went live again was to show you another little tip. And you know what? I'm thinking I might hide these tips in our videos to make sure people watch them. So once again, if you like, subscribe, and leave a comment or something in chat to know that you actually like this kind of stuff. I like doing woodworking. Who knows? I might make it a better setup for streaming, and I might start doing projects like a wood chair or how to make I don't know. My mother went on this whole thing about 2x4 furniture that was being made, or there's pallet furniture. You can make things out of pallets. Kind of really weird stuff. But what I wanted to show you was this little nifty trick for that I had before. Here, let me just get another bit. Just in case you don't have the right tools on hand, there are ways about doing this. Now, when you're drilling a pilot hole, sometimes you don't want to go all the way through the wood. Let's say you only want to go ½ an inch into the wood. You have this long bit connected to your drill. How do you know what ½ an inch is? You can eyeball it, but really there's a couple ways of doing it. One, there's something you can buy called a depth break. What it really is, this is not one, but this is an example of what it is. So you'll have your bit, and you'll have an object with a little screw on it, and it'll go on, and you basically tighten the screw, and it'll hold it in place. So it will not allow the drill bit to go any deeper than where your break is. So you can just measure how far out you want, and there you go. That's a modern way of doing it. Another way you can do this is you can make a jig. Like I keep talking about that word. Well, guess what? Tons of people make their own jigs for these reasons. You can basically use the bit you're going to use, drill a hole in a piece of wood. We'll just say kind of like this. Drill a hole in a piece of wood the depth that you want. Now, if this hole was actually the right size of the bit wouldn't be able to go through it because see this top part, it'll stop it. And even if it didn't, the drill itself, the chuck would hold onto the bit and won't let it go through. So if it's the right depth, there you go. See, that will force it to only go that deep. And you can put it, basically the good thing about one of these is that you only need it, you don't need different widths of these, or length of these guides. All you would actually need is one that's the proper diameter to the bit to fit in, because all you have to do is slide this on, put this into your drill, and then you can push this farther back before you tighten it, and it will adjust how much length is sticking out that you're drilling. That's another way of doing it. I thought that way was kind of cool. But I'll show you the trick my daddy showed me. So my father did a lot of carpentry. He was in the Marines. He was an engineer. He was a mechanic when he came out. He drove a dump truck. He did a lot of this kind of stuff. So he had a lot of these little kind of cool tricks. By the way, my wife used this, and I can tell you why. Notice I was peeling back the tape. It annoys the living everything out of me, because you have to, you have to find that edge, and you have to grab it, and you have to pull it. So here's another little hack. On your tape, before you put it away, pull a little piece out like this, just kind of off of it, and fold it over onto itself. You make a little flap. See, a little flap. Now it's folded over on itself. So I'll push it down. See, it doesn't stick. I now know where the beginning of the tape is. If I'm going to use it, I can cut this part off or rip it off and pull it out, and I can just do it again on the tape. So when I put it away, I don't have to sit there and fuss to find where the edge is. Another little trick. But anyways, so what you want to do for this depth gauge for your drill bit is get some tape. It depends on your personal preference. I usually like a little over 1.5 inches, 2 inches, something like this. So you got your tape, and you get your bit, and you measure on your bit how far down you want to go. You put the top of the tape at that point, say for about like that long. Then what you do is you fold it over like that. Rip off the excess. There you go. You have a little kind of a flag thing going on. Give me a second, I need to fix this tape thing again before it bothers me tomorrow, and I blame her for something she didn't do. She probably didn't do it the first time. I got in a rush, and I probably just put it away. But we'll blame her. She doesn't watch, so it's okay. Now you have your flag. Well, what good is this little flag going to do? When you drill with this depth gauge on your flag, when the paper hits, what it's actually going to do is brush away the sawdust. Because when you drill, you make sawdust. So when you notice the sawdust kind of brush away a little bit, or this flag kind of just start hitting, you'll notice the noise change a little bit if you listen carefully. You know you hit the right depth. Now, this isn't a permanent solution. You may be able to drill like 5-10 holes with this little flag thing. But it's cheap to do. You can do it over again. It's easy to carry on. You understand how all these depth gauges and stuff. But yeah, that's a way you can make sure you only drill a specific depth in your thing. I was actually going to use that a second ago until I realized the screws are too long. So that's why I realized they're too long. I measured them. Yeah, so stuff happens. It's okay. We'll figure it out. You basically just roll with the punches and figure it out. But the awesome thing is that all the cuts on this piece of board are done. I don't need the screws for the hardware today because, in all honesty, they're not going to go on until after the paint's on. There's two schools of thought. You could put the hardware on and then mask it in paint. I prefer not to, just because I know how terrible a painter I am, and accidents happen, and I don't want my hinges to get messed up. So I tend to just prep it, paint it, and then I'll touch all the hardware afterwards. Some people just put the hardware on and they'll mask it. I don't do that. So I don't actually need the hardware probably until after all the paint's dried anyways. And since I'm going to do 2 coats at least, it's not going to be today because paint does take some time to dry. If you want to know how long it takes your paint to dry, it will tell you on your paint can how long it will take to dry. And that's not a suggested drying time. That is a minimum drying time. Things that people don't realize, if it's humid outside, paint don't dry. It will take forever for paint to dry. I don't care how hot it is. If it's humid, that paint ain't drying. that's why if you can use some directional heaters, like like those sunlight lamps. Some people have paint rooms that they'll have actually canvas cloths, or sorry, plastic cloths that drop down around it so dust don't get into it. It's a clean room. But they also can put a dehumidifier in there to make sure the paint dries in time. Right now it seems it's a little humid here in Southern California. I'd probably say it's around 30, I'm not sure, but probably around 20-30% humidity. So it will take a little time for this paint to dry, not excessively. That's within kind of normal California things. So it'll probably only take half an hour for the paint to dry to touch. A little longer for it to cure. The difference from drying to touch and curing is dry and touch means that if you touch with your hand, it won't feel wet. I'm not talking about like smearing your hand on it, I'm just like touch it. It won't get on your hands because it'll be dry to the touch. Curing means the paint has actually dried fully, that basically has a bond now to your wood. It shouldn't scrape off or pop off if everything's done right, your wood was clean, and you followed all the things. It basically means it's done, it's cured, it's ready. But like I said, so I'm probably thinking I'm not going to be doing the running out for the stores later night, maybe tomorrow, just to get the piece of the hardware I'm missing. And I can do that while the paint's going through its process of curing, sanding. But that's one board done with the wood, just need to clean it up. I'm probably going to go through the first round of sanding on it, just make sure to get it nice and smooth and prepped. I don't know, I really have to decide that. In the past, I've usually sanded, so if there's any woodworkers out there, you might be able to answer your preference on this. Do you sand like the day before you paint? Or do you sand before you paint? You know what I mean? Like, usually I'm so in-depth in a project that I usually just I sand as soon as sanding, and I start my painting on it. For this one, I actually have some other boards to cut that I might just hold off on the sanding until after all my cuts are done, and then I'll sand it right before as part of my prep paint stuff for tomorrow. So I do a couple, like I said, first round with medium grit sandpaper, another round with fine grit, blow it off, rub it with a dust-free rag. I'm going to do my painting then, because here's my thought. There's a reason I just want to bring this up. Oh, thank you very much for loving the stream there. Sorry, the camera's a little far from me, so it's hard for me to read. My vision's not the greatest. I'm getting kind of old. I'm sorry. Probably also a reason why I like to woodwork. But thanks for the love of the stream. Well, actually, that's the thing. You're right. It does depend if you're going to prime, because you still have to sand after you prime. My thought in this is that all the drills and holing is done for this one piece. So I'm done with all the actual part I need to do on this. This is pretty much ready to sand and prime and paint. The thing is that I have 3 other boards, and I'm going to paint them all at once. If you're going to use, like I said, a paint sprayer, it's just best to do everything at once. I'd rather just do it, get it all prepped. So my thought is if I put this aside and store it, it might get nicked, which will ruin my whole sand on it. The whole point I got it nice and smooth while I work on the other ones and get them. So I'm thinking, I'm probably gonna put this aside. I'll get all the other woods notched out and prepped, and then do a sand across all of them, and then just do some paint. But that's right. It matters if you want to prime. And my thing is as I remember, if you didn't see my stream over there, NSX-Boy, sorry. My earlier stream was basically, I went on my rant about why I prefer stain and varnishes versus paint. But for this project, it's been requested I use paint for the color because of what's being built. So this paint is, I believe, let me see what it is. It is I believe it's a paint and primer all-in-one kind of a thing, which is going to make it a little harder to go through the paint sprayer, but still doable. Wash warm soapy water, so yeah, it's a latex paint. So it's fine. We'll work with it. So thank you very much. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be on for a little bit more. I'm actually taking a small break now that I had this minor accomplishment done for myself. But any woodworking questions and stuff, I'm also going to check my chat and posts after this is over. I'll try to comment on them. I'm probably going to come back online later. I just wanted to show you the progress I made on this one. This is done, so I'm going to knock out the other 3. I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me do the other 3 because it's very boring. The only time I usually watch someone do this kind of stuff is that they have the the magic ability of like, you know, fast forward, that everything's like at 4 times the normal time rates, time lapsed. Can't do that live. It'll be awesome though, because that means my project will get done so much faster if I can just speed myself up, but can't do that live, and hearing all the noise might not be the greatest thing. So I'll come back after I finish the other 3 boards and they get to the same state that I'm in right this one, and then we'll probably go over paint prep. So I'll show you how to clean it off, sand it, and get it all ready for the spray, and we'll end on that one, and I'll probably do one more after that on how to actually do this spray. I'm still debating about this. I love paint sprayers, and they're great for projects like this, but they're also a little pain, they're a little extra stuff. I might just whip out a brush and a roller. Matters how much time I have. We'll see. So thank you very much, guys, for watching. Once again, this is a System Freak here doing a woodworking project. This is part 1, and I guess now we've decided it's going to be a 4-part episode. So we did our intro. Technically this would be part 2, wouldn't it? Because I already did the intro. We'll say intro plus 3 parts. There we go. Math makes sense now. So we have 2 more videos probably coming up after this, and maybe one at the very end of the conclusion showing the final product, and then how I'm going to pack it up for shipping to where I need to get it to go, because you don't want paint boards rubbing against each other. So we'll see how that goes. But